Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning into this story. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I've been a cab driver in this city for nearly a decade. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills, and it's a front row seat to the shifting tides of an enormous urban landscape. Over the years, I've ferried business executives, tourists, late-night drifters, and everything in between. You might call it a thankless job, but I never minded it too much. Until one fateful night changed everything I thought I knew about myself, my profession, and the place I call home. Allow me to set the stage. Imagine a sprawling metropolis known for its flashing billboards, congested roads, and towering steel skyscrapers. On a normal day, the streets are alive with noise. You can hear music from passing cars, vendors yelling about special discounts, and the constant hum of a city that rarely sleeps. That night, however, was different. I started my shift at dusk, just like always, but I noticed something off right away. The roads were emptier, neon signs flickered in half-deserted neighborhoods, and people hurried along the sidewalks as if they were trying to outrun some invisible threat. Even the usual chatter on the cab radio was strangely subdued. I remember adjusting my rearview mirror, telling myself not to get caught up in wild rumors. Over the past few weeks, there had been whispers of an unusual illness spreading through the slums on the city's outskirts. A few local channels reported on it, but the official line was that it was nothing to worry about. Seasonal sickness, perhaps. That's what the authorities claimed. Still, the worry in people's eyes told a different story. That night, dispatch was quiet, too quiet. Usually I'd get calls to pick up someone from a busy nightclub or do an airport run. Instead, I idled at a busy intersection for nearly 15 minutes before a single request came through. The address was in a part of town I rarely visited after dark, not because it was dangerous, but because it was a bit out of the way. I hesitated, figuring I might waste my time going all the way there without a guarantee of a decent fare. But a job is a job, and I had rent looming over me. I headed to the location. On my way, I drove past closed convenience stores, shut down cafes, and a few police barricades I couldn't quite explain. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe there'd been some kind of demonstration or a building inspection. Maybe the city had decided to reroute traffic. My intuition told me something more serious was going on. Occasional news updates on my radio crackled ominously. Phrases like containment efforts, civic cooperation, and stay indoors if possible drifted in and out of static. When I finally arrived at the pin on my navigation system, I noticed it was a modest apartment complex. The building lights were dim, and the street lamp out front flickered in a pattern that made the entire area feel unsettling. I parked near the curb and glanced at the clock. I was 2 minutes early. No big deal, I thought. I'd wait. After a few minutes, my passenger emerged from the building lobby. He was tall, thin, and walked with a heavy slouch, as though carrying an invisible weight on his back. At first glance, I thought he was just tired or unwell. His coat was wrinkled, and he had a scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. As he climbed into the back seat, I offered my usual greeting. "Good evening," I said, forcing a smile. "Where to?" He coughed, a deep, rattling cough that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Just drive," he managed to say in a strained voice. "I'll tell you where when we get there." I'd normally ask for more details. A final destination, a neighborhood, or at least a direction. But something in his tone told me not to pry. He looked genuinely distressed. His eyes were sunken, and his skin appeared clammy under the faint glow of the overhead light. I took a breath and pulled away from the curb, deciding to drive slowly down the main avenue while waiting for his instructions. For the first few blocks, the car was silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional sputter from my passenger's cough. I peeked at him through the rearview mirror. He had one hand over his mouth, as if trying to suppress another coughing fit. The other hand gripped a folded newspaper. I couldn't see the date, but I recognized the newspaper's logo. It was one of those smaller outlets that specialized in investigative reporting. They'd been writing alarming pieces about the spread of some unknown sickness for weeks, claiming it was far more serious than the authorities would admit. My passenger caught me looking. He said nothing, but his gaze spoke volumes. His eyes seemed to ask, "What are you staring at?" Embarrassed, I focused back on the road. When we approached a red light, I noticed a group of individuals huddled around a dimly lit convenience store on the corner. They looked anxious, frequently glancing at their phones. From behind the store's glass doors, I saw the clerk urging them to leave. It was as if nobody wanted to be outside that night for longer than necessary. The passenger cleared his throat. "Turn left here," he muttered. I complied, even though the left turn led us down a poorly lit alley. The city's glow seemed to fade behind tall brick buildings. The gloom settled in so quickly that it felt like we were traveling back in time to a less civilized era. Something about that alley put me on edge. It was too quiet. "Sir?" I finally said, keeping my voice neutral. "Do you mind telling me where you need to go?" He hesitated. "Head toward the old industrial zone by the docks," he said. "There's an address, but it might not be safe. We'll see." I swallowed. The old industrial zone was notorious. It was partially abandoned, partially under renovation, and entirely mysterious after dark. I'd been there maybe twice before, both times for late-night deliveries when ride-sharing apps were new to the city. Not safe? That phrase set off alarm bells in my mind, but I tried to keep calm. A paying passenger was a paying passenger. As we cleared the narrow alley and re-entered a slightly busier road, I caught sight of more police cruisers in the distance. Flashing lights illuminated the base of a large overpass. A swarm of uniformed officers seemed to be redirecting traffic. I slowed the car, unsure of whether I'd be allowed through. "Take the next right," my passenger whispered urgently. "Don't go near them." I raised an eyebrow in the mirror. "Is there a reason?" He let out a soft groan before replying. "They won't let us through. Everyone's panicking. There's talk of forced quarantine. You don't want to end up trapped." His words sank in. I'd heard rumors from other cabbies about certain neighborhoods being sealed off. It was all hearsay, but the mention of quarantine sent a chill through me. I nodded and changed course, driving away from the flashing lights and deeper into the city's forgotten roads. With each passing block, the streets grew eerier. We saw fewer cars and fewer people. Those we did see seemed to be in a hurry, darting into vehicles or buildings with quick, anxious movements. Some wore masks over their mouths, others carried handkerchiefs. The radio in my cab, usually a source of random chatter and traffic updates, had been broadcasting strange bulletins. A monotone voice repeated instructions urging citizens to remain calm, avoid large gatherings, and contact health services if they experienced any unusual symptoms. I began to wonder if my passenger had those unusual symptoms. He had coughed multiple times since entering my cab. I tried not to let my imagination get the better of me, but it was getting harder to brush aside my concerns. Still, I couldn't just throw him out on the street. That would be heartless, and potentially dangerous for both of us if what he said about quarantines was correct. Eventually, we stopped at a red light near a shuttered grocery store. All the windows were boarded up, and a handwritten sign read, "Closed until further notice." The passenger glanced outside, then pulled his coat tighter. "I need to get some water," he said, voice raspy. "I'm so thirsty." I looked around. The only nearby building with any sign of life was a small pharmacy across the road. Its neon sign flickered faintly, half the letters burnt out. I doubted it was open. "Should we check that place?" I asked, gesturing through the windshield. He nodded. "Yes, please." I parked the cab at the curb. The pharmacy's doors were locked, but the lights inside were on. I knocked on the glass, calling out to see if anyone was there. At first, no response. My passenger stood behind me, leaning against the wall. A moment later, a young man in a white coat peered out from behind a heavy metal gate near the back of the store. He gave us a wary look. "We're closed," he called out. "We don't have much left anyway." "My passenger just needs some water," I said. "We can pay." The man stared at us for a long second, then hesitantly slid open the gate. He pointed to a row of coolers lining the far wall. The electricity must have been running on a generator because the lights flickered occasionally, and the hum of a cooler fan was uneven. My passenger hurried over, snatched a couple of bottled waters, and placed some money on the counter. As we turned to leave, I noticed a sign taped to a rack of medicines. "No more face masks, no more gloves. Please do not ask." Below it, there was an official-looking notice about an unidentified viral strain that might be spread through bodily fluids. My stomach twisted in knots. I was about to ask the pharmacist about the notice, but when I turned around, he'd already slid the metal gate back down. The store lights clicked off, leaving us in near darkness. My passenger chugged one bottle of water on the spot. His hands were shaking, and in the poor light, I could see the subtle red blotches on his fingertips. I tried not to stare, but it was difficult. Once he finished, he exhaled as though he'd just run a marathon. Then he followed me outside and climbed back into the cab, closing the door with trembling fingers. We continued driving in silence. I realized I hadn't asked for a specific address yet, just the area near the old industrial docks. I was starting to question my own judgment. Should I really be driving him around without any idea of what awaited us? My mind buzzed with unanswered questions. Is he infected with this thing? Is it safe for me to keep going? Could I catch it just by being near him? I tried to open a window hoping to let in some fresh air, but my passenger immediately protested. "No," he said, his voice cracking. "Keep them closed. They said the air might be unsafe." My pulse quickened. "Who said that?" He hesitated. "People online, and some colleagues of mine." "Are you sure it's airborne?" I asked, my voice tense. "I thought it was just through contact." He gave me a long look in the mirror, eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else. Resignation, perhaps. "We don't know," he whispered. "But better safe than sorry, right?" I nodded slowly, feeling a bead of sweat roll down my temple. The ventilation system in my cab wasn't exactly top tier, and without the windows cracked, the interior felt stale and stifling. The anxiousness in my chest grew stronger, but I kept driving, searching for a single sign that might reassure me I wasn't making a terrible mistake. As we neared the industrial zone, the roads became rough and uneven. Potholes littered the asphalt, and many of the street lamps were either broken or flickering sporadically. The half-finished skeletons of new factories loomed on the horizon, their frames silhouetted against the night sky. In the near distance, I could see the faint sparkle of water, a reminder that the docks lay just ahead. The passenger pointed to a sign that read, "Sawmill Road." "Turn there," he said quietly. Sawmill Road was barely more than a dirt path, lined with rusted fences on either side. Piles of debris, wooden crates, old tires, and scraps of metal lay scattered about. I recognized the place as an old loading zone from decades past, now abandoned. A sense of dread washed over me. It was the kind of area you'd expect to see in a detective show, the scene of a grim investigation. Why would anyone want to come here? "I have friends," my passenger explained as though reading my thoughts. "They told me to meet them at a safe house near the docks. They said they have resources there, food, medication, maybe even a cure." I almost slammed on the brakes. A cure? The word bounced around in my brain. If there was any legitimacy to his claim, why wasn't it public knowledge? Why would it be hidden away in such a desolate location? He must have sensed my skepticism. "I know how it sounds," he said, another coughing fit cutting him off. This time, he brought his scarf to his mouth before continuing. "But I have to try." Against my better judgment, I pressed on. The thought of a potential breakthrough for this strange illness gnawed at me. If there was even a sliver of truth to what he said, maybe it could help others. Maybe it could help him. And maybe, just maybe, it could keep me safe from catching whatever was out there. The path eventually widened into a clearing. A few broken-down warehouses stood around a large gravel lot. We parked near one of them, the headlights illuminating peeling paint and shattered windows. My passenger told me this was our stop, so I braced myself, cutting the engine and stepping out into the cool night air. The silence was overwhelming. The city's hum was gone, replaced by the distant lapping of water against the docks and the occasional creak of metal in the wind. Overhead, a sky filled with faint stars reminded me of how small we all are in the grand scheme of things. My passenger got out, wincing as he stood. He clutched his scarf and gestured for me to follow him around the side of the warehouse. I thought about refusing, about staying in the relative safety of my cab, but something compelled me to go. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe a shred of compassion for this stranger who seemed so desperate. We found a door marked with faded graffiti. He knocked a few times in a pattern. 2 short taps, a pause, then another tap. Nothing happened. He repeated the sequence, this time with more urgency. Still no reply. I could see the fear lining his face. Finally, he tried the handle. It was locked. He cursed under his breath, trying to suppress another cough. I glanced at the windows. All were broken, the shards missing or scattered on the ground. The entire building looked abandoned. "You sure this is the right place?" I asked quietly. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "They said, Building 7 near the pier. This is it." We circled to the back, where a large rusted roller door stood partially ajar. Carefully we slipped under it. Inside, the warehouse was dim, lit only by a few emergency bulbs dangling from exposed rafters. The cavernous space was filled with dusty crates and shadows that stretched along the concrete floor. A chill settled around us. A soft glow flickered from a side office. My passenger and I cautiously approached. Stepping inside, we found signs of recent occupation. Empty food wrappers, bottled water, and a small camping lantern placed on a rickety wooden table. A pair of plastic chairs were knocked over, as if whoever had been there left in a hurry. "Hello?" my passenger called out, voice echoing off the metal walls. No answer. He let out a shaky sigh and stumbled forward, nearly collapsing into one of the chairs. I hurried to steady him, noticing fresh perspiration on his brow. He was burning up. I felt a surge of pity, mixed with alarm. "Let me look for something to help," I offered, not sure what I might find in this makeshift hideout. He nodded weakly, leaning his head back against the wall. I rummaged through the clutter. Most of it was worthless trash, discarded packaging, empty cans, bits of broken electronics. Then I noticed a half-zipped duffel bag in the corner. Inside were some basic medical supplies. A few bandages, a thermometer, a couple of unopened water bottles, and disinfectant wipes. Careful not to invade privacy too much, I grabbed the thermometer and offered it to him. "Here. Maybe we can see how bad your temperature is." He accepted it with trembling hands. While he waited for the reading, I opened one of the water bottles for him. He took a few small sips, then closed his eyes as though the act of drinking was exhausting. The thermometer beeped. He pulled it out and looked at the result. His eyebrows shot up. "How bad?" I asked, though his reaction made it clear. "Way too high," he said, voice trembling. "I need to cool down." I patted my pockets, searching for anything that could help, but I only had my phone, keys, and a small packet of tissues. The passenger's breathing grew labored, and he clutched his chest. Outside, the wind rattled the metal panels of the warehouse. A sense of urgency weighed on me. If his friends were supposed to meet him here with medication, or something even more advanced, they were nowhere in sight. Suddenly, my passenger spoke up, his words disjointed. "The people behind the official channels. They're hiding how fast this thing spreads," he said, pulling the folded newspaper from his coat. His eyes glazed over as he relayed what he knew. "It's not just through touch. It could be droplets, the air, the water supply. We don't know. But it's moving quickly. A colleague of mine worked at a research lab. He said they found a possible antidote, experimental, never tested on humans. I listened, heart pounding. You think it's here? He glanced around the empty warehouse. We were supposed to meet, to test it. But I'm too late. They might have been forced to evacuate. Or worse. His voice broke on that last word. The weight of his despair hit me like a punch. If there was something that could halt this outbreak, and if that knowledge fell into the wrong hands, or was lost entirely, then all the rumors and panic we'd been seeing would be nothing compared to what was coming. I helped him to his feet. We should look for clues, I suggested. Maybe they left a note or something that tells us where they went. He nodded, mustering what little energy he had. Together, we searched the office. Desks had been pushed aside to make room for what looked like sleeping bags and a makeshift living space. A few file folders lay scattered on the floor, their contents strewn about. Most of the documents were scientific reports, half of them unreadable under the weak lantern light. I picked one up, squinting at a line that read, "Strain mutation potential, uncertain progress, recommended immediate trial on volunteers." A million questions ran through my head. What volunteers? Where would they run these trials? I flipped through more papers until I found a single sheet with a hand-drawn map of the city, marked with red circles around certain districts. One circle was labeled Site B Docks. A set of coordinates was scribbled underneath, but no specific instructions on how to get there. My passenger stared at the map, brow furrowed. Site B, that might be somewhere else along the waterfront, he murmured. He pointed to the approximate spot. We're here, I think, but the coordinates are over there, near the cargo ships. I bit my lip. The cargo shipyard was off limits to civilians, especially late at night. Security was tight on a normal day. But these weren't normal days. If the rumors of forced quarantines were true, the yard might be deserted, or worse, heavily guarded. "Do you want to try?" I asked, unsure if I was hoping he'd say no. He pressed a hand to his forehead, wincing. "If there's a chance they moved the research to a safer spot, yes, I have to try." Carefully, I led him back to my cab. The night air felt cooler than before, or maybe I was just more aware of the tension in my shoulders. Once we were inside, I double-checked the route on my phone's map app, though it hadn't been updated with any new road closures. We'd be heading east along the water until we reached the cargo docks. As we made our way there, the city around us showed more signs of distress. Occasionally, we'd see people running, glancing over their shoulders as though pursued. Sirens wailed in the distance. The sight of multiple emergency vehicles racing by was enough to make my passenger shrink into the back seat, clutching his scarf tighter. We passed an intersection where a group of uniformed medics was trying to direct civilians into large transport vans. The side of one vehicle read, "Emergency Quarantine Transport." It was a chilling reminder that the situation was deteriorating faster than I cared to admit. We kept our distance, skirting the edges of the main roads whenever possible. At one point, I stopped at a gas station to fill up, realizing I was running on fumes. The station was eerily deserted. The lights were on, pumps still operational, but not a single soul in sight. As I stood next to the cab, fueling up under the fluorescent glow, I could almost feel eyes on me from the shadows. My nerves were on edge. I half expected someone, or something, to leap out. But the night was silent except for the low hum of the pump. I finished quickly and hurried back inside. My passenger was breathing shallowly, but he managed a weak nod. "Thank you," he said. "No problem," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Let's get moving." By the time we reached the cargo docks, the moon hung high overhead, casting pale light on the massive cranes and shipping containers. The place felt abandoned. Usually, you'd see trucks moving containers, or spot a few security guards patrolling. Tonight, not a soul. The gates at the entrance stood open, as if someone had left in a hurry. "This is it," the passenger muttered, checking the coordinates on the map we'd found. "Site B should be near the loading zone." I drove slowly, headlights sweeping across rows of stacked containers. They resembled a towering metallic maze. Some were broken open, their contents strewn about as if looted or hastily searched. The further we went, the more the wind carried the strong scent of salt water and rust. Eventually, we found a small administrative building near the end of the yard. It had cracked windows and a rusted sign that read, "Dockmaster's Office." According to the makeshift map, this location matched the coordinates for Site B. I parked outside, cut the engine, and helped my passenger to the door. He knocked lightly, but there was no response. The handle turned, and we slipped inside. The dockmaster's office was a cramped, two-story structure. The lower floor had a reception area with a couple of worn couches and a desk scattered with paperwork. A flight of metal stairs led to the second floor, where we could see a dim light flickering through a window. Carefully we climbed up. At the top of the stairs, we found a single hallway, lined with doors to various offices. One door was slightly ajar, and faint light spilled into the corridor. My passenger gripped my arm, his breathing ragged. We entered the room together, uncertain what we'd find. Inside, a small lamp flickered on a metal desk. Charts of shipping lanes and weather patterns covered the walls. On the desk, several files were open, each bearing official stamps and seals. A battered laptop sat nearby, its screen cracked. An empty chair was pushed away from the desk, as though someone had left in a hurry. We weren't alone. In the far corner sat a figure, slumped against the wall, wearing what looked like a lab coat. At first glance I thought they were resting, but a closer look revealed something chilling. They appeared unconscious, their face pale. My passenger hurried forward, ignoring my whispered caution. "Dr. Morrow," he called, shaking the figure's shoulder gently. The figure didn't respond. I stayed by the doorway, my heart thumping in my chest. After a moment, my passenger sighed and looked back at me, eyes full of worry. He's alive but barely responding. Pulse is weak. I approached with caution. Dr. Morrow's lab coat had a small ID tag clipped to it, indicating some kind of research position. My passenger rummaged through the pockets, finding a small notebook. He flipped it open, scanning the pages. "This is his data on the antidote," he explained quietly, eyes flickering with renewed hope. "Notes on testing intervals, dosage. If the rumors are true, this might be the key." We spent the next few minutes trying to rouse Dr. Morrow. He fluttered his eyelids once, then let out a faint groan. My passenger asked him about the cure, about where it might be, but Dr. Morrow only mumbled incoherent phrases. I managed to catch one word that sounded like lab, but it was unclear. As my passenger pored over the notebook, it became evident that the antidote was still in a volatile stage. There were mentions of successful trials on lab animals, but it hadn't been fully tested on humans. The notes suggested that the illness was mutating rapidly. Time was of the essence, and Dr. Morrow, who might have been the only one with the knowledge to administer this experimental solution, was in no state to help. While I paced the room, trying to figure out our next move, my passenger doubled over with a violent coughing fit. I rushed to his side, steadying him as he gasped for air. When he finally caught his breath, he looked at me with eyes that shone with desperation. "Help me test it," he rasped. "We have to, before it's too late." My stomach lurched. "Test what exactly?" He reached into the duffel bag we'd taken from the warehouse. Inside, hidden beneath bandages and documents, was a small case. He opened it to reveal a series of vials. Each one contained a clear liquid. A label on the side read something like, "Prototype Human Trial Pending." My passenger's hand shook as he lifted the case out, his eyes darting between me and Dr. Morrow, who remained slumped against the wall. "If the notes are right," my passenger said through gritted teeth, "this could be our best chance, or at least my best chance." I don't know how long I have. My mind raced. I was just a cab driver. What did I know about administering experimental medicine? But I also saw the state he was in, and the fear in his eyes. If this was the only option left, I couldn't just walk away. But was it right to help him do something that could be dangerous? He extended the vial toward me. "Please," he pleaded. "I need your help. I can't do it alone." I hesitated, thinking about every risk. We had no doctor to guide us. Dr. Morrow was unconscious and couldn't confirm the dosage. There was no guarantee the liquid in these vials was safe or effective. But if we did nothing, my passenger might not last the night. Gently, I took the vial from his trembling hand. "How do we even administer this?" I asked, voice shaking. He showed me a syringe inside the case, along with some rudimentary instructions scribbled in the notebook. My mind spun at the idea of giving someone an injection in a dingy dockmaster's office. But time was ticking away, and his condition was rapidly declining. Even in the poor light, I could see that his fingertips had taken on a worrying color, and his breathing was shallow. I knelt beside him, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. He held out his arm, turning his face away as though he couldn't bear to watch. I followed the instructions as best I could. Clean the area, fill the syringe with the correct amount, and inject slowly. My hands shook the entire time, a jolt of adrenaline surging through me. When it was done, we both sat there, waiting, uncertain of what would happen next. Seconds stretched into minutes. He began to sweat profusely, and his eyes rolled back for a moment. I panicked, thinking I'd made a fatal error. But then he exhaled sharply, his muscles loosening, as if something had shifted inside him. He slumped against the wall, breathing in measured gasps. "Are you okay?" I asked, feeling the tension in my voice. He nodded slowly. I don't know," he whispered. "I feel different, tired." I wiped the sweat from my brow. "Take it easy. Let's see if Dr. Morrow wakes up. Maybe he can guide us." Hours seemed to pass in that cramped office. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. The city felt a world away. Occasionally, I heard faint echoes of sirens or shouting across the water, but we were enveloped in our own bubble of uncertainty. The passenger drifted in and out of a light sleep. Dr. Morrow occasionally stirred, but remained largely unresponsive. I paced around, rummaging through the files and notes, trying to piece together a clearer picture of what was happening outside. According to the most recent documents, the outbreak had spread to multiple districts, and certain government agencies were recommending immediate closures of public spaces. Some bulletins warned that within days, the entire city might be under strict quarantine protocols. At one point, my passenger murmured my name. I realized he'd never actually asked for mine, nor had I asked for his. But in this moment, none of that mattered. I rushed to his side. His fever seemed to have dropped a bit, and his breathing was steadier. When our eyes met, I noticed a spark of clarity in them that hadn't been there before. "It might be working," he said, wonder in his voice. "I can't say for sure, but I feel less pain." Before I could respond, a heavy thud echoed from downstairs. Both of us froze, hearts pounding. Another thud, followed by scraping sounds, as though something was being dragged across the floor. I felt panic rising in my chest, uncertain if it was the wind, an animal, or, far worse, another person. Quietly, I took a small metal rod I'd found near the desk, perhaps part of a dismantled lamp, crept to the top of the stairs, and peered down. In the dark, I could see a figure moving near the reception desk. They were hunched over, rummaging through drawers and cabinets. For a moment, I considered calling out, but something about the figure's posture made me hesitate. They seemed frantic, knocking items aside. A sudden crash made me jump. The figure had slammed a drawer shut with enough force to send papers flying. I backed away, returning to my passenger. He looked at me with wide eyes, still too weak to stand without assistance. "What do we do?" he whispered. I wasn't sure. Our initial impulse might have been to hide or flee, but given the precarious condition of my passenger and Dr. Morrow, it was impossible to make a quick escape. We had no idea if the person downstairs was friend or foe, or perhaps just another victim of the unfolding crisis. As I hovered by the door, the footsteps crept closer to the stairs. A beam of light from a flashlight cut through the dark hallway. I gripped the metal rod tightly, my heart hammering in my ears. Then unexpectedly a voice called out, "Hello? Is anyone up there?" The voice sounded hoarse, but not hostile. It carried a note of desperation that I recognized all too well. I exchanged a look with my passenger, who nodded for me to respond. "Yes," I called back. "We're here. Are you safe?" A pause. Then the person climbed a few steps. We could see their silhouette, medium build, wearing some kind of heavy jacket. "I'm not infected, if that's what you mean," they replied, voice trembling. "I'm looking for supplies. My group got separated. We saw lights here." I glanced at my passenger, who gestured for me to let the newcomer approach. Carefully, I lowered the makeshift weapon and stepped aside. The figure emerged into the glow of the desk lamp. It was a middle-aged person with shadows under their eyes, hair matted from sweat or seawater, and a haunted expression that mirrored our own fears. They lowered their flashlight, noticing Dr. Morrow and my passenger. "Are they injured, sick?" I explained, choosing my words carefully. "We're trying to help them." The newcomer's eyes darted around the room, taking in the scattered notes and medical supplies. "You have medicine?" I shook my head. "Just some basic things, and an experimental formula we're not sure about." They swallowed nervously. "I heard rumors there was a cure," they admitted, "that some scientists were hiding out here, working on it." My passenger tried to stand, leaning heavily on the wall. "We're not sure it's a cure, but it might help. We've already tested one vial." The newcomer's eyes lit up. "So it's real? You have it?" A tense silence settled over the room. We didn't know this person's intentions. Were they just a desperate survivor looking for hope? Or did they have other motives? After a moment, they deflated slightly, glancing at Dr. Morrow's unconscious form. "If it's real, we need to share it with others, people out there." They gestured towards the distant city lights. "They're in bad shape. No help is coming." In that moment, we realized that if this experimental antidote had any merit, it might be our only shot at slowing the outbreak. But the resources were limited, and the instructions were incomplete. Even if we wanted to distribute it, how would we do so safely? And to whom? My passenger clutched the syringe case protectively. I could see the conflict on his face. Part of him wanted to share this discovery for the greater good, while another part remembered how difficult it had been just to get here in time to save himself. And there were only so many vials. Even if it worked for him, how would it help thousands or tens of thousands of others? The newcomer took a step forward. "We can't keep this to ourselves," they insisted. "People are looking for answers. If you can just show everyone there's a chance." My passenger grimaced, sweat beading on his brow again. "We need medical experts," he said. "We can't just hand this out without knowing how it works on different people." "But where are we going to find experts?" I added, exasperation creeping into my tone. "The city is in lockdown. Hospitals are overflowing or closing. Anyone with real knowledge might be impossible to reach now." The newcomer scrunched their face. "I know of a clinic near the east side that hasn't shut down yet. Word is they're still taking in patients. If we could get these vials there, maybe the doctors could figure something out." We all exchanged glances. Our only real option might be to go back into the heart of the city, into the chaos, and hope we could find some semblance of medical structure. A daunting prospect, but the alternative was staying here, waiting for help that might never come, and watching this new illness spread unchecked. My passenger's knees buckled slightly. I rushed to support him. "I'm better than before," he managed. "But I'm not sure how much time we have until things get worse. For me. For everyone." We helped Dr. Morrow onto the newcomer's shoulder. Although still unresponsive, Dr. Morrow seemed stable enough to move. Cautiously, we left the dockmaster's office. The yard was just as deserted as before, the moon still illuminating the steel containers and silent cranes. Together, we made our way back to my cab. The newcomer lingered, scanning the dark horizon, as if expecting a swarm of infected people to appear at any moment. Once we'd settled everyone inside, I started the engine. The plan was to drive back into the city, aiming for the east side clinic the newcomer had mentioned. There, if luck was on our side, we'd find doctors who could handle the research notes and the vials. As we pulled out of the docks, a faint, distant glow caught my attention. Several blocks away, fires danced in the night, casting an orange haze over a part of the skyline. The roads leading back were likely to be blocked or heavily monitored. It wouldn't be easy, but we had little choice. My passenger clutched the case of vials, occasionally checking on Dr. Morrow's shallow breathing. The newcomer looked out the window in silence, perhaps wondering if we'd even make it to the clinic alive. Despite the tension, I felt a flicker of resolve. Maybe this was more than just a job for me now. Maybe I was part of something bigger, something that could determine the fate of countless people. As we navigated the deserted streets, it felt like entering a new world. Broken glass littered sidewalks. The air smelled of burning plastic. In some intersections, stalled cars and hastily erected barricades slowed our progress. We passed through once bustling neighborhoods, now ghostly under the flicker of damaged street lamps. Occasionally, we spotted small groups of people moving in the shadows, but no one approached us directly. At one intersection, we found a makeshift barrier of metal scraps and wooden planks. A handwritten sign read, "Quarantine Zone. Authorized personnel only." The newcomer hopped out to move some debris so we could pass. As I inched the cab forward, I noticed the battered storefronts on either side. Windows had been smashed, and it looked like someone had taken supplies in a hurry. My passenger let out a soft moan, clutching his stomach. I glanced at him in the mirror. "Are you okay?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. He gave a small nod. "Better than before," he said, though he winced as he spoke. I think the antidote might be holding off the worst of it, but I'm not out of the woods yet." Once we cleared the barricade, we continued east. The newcomer directed me through side roads, claiming they knew a safe path. Every so often we'd come across a group of frightened citizens, huddled around burning trash bins for warmth, their eyes filled with uncertainty and fear. Part of me wanted to stop and offer help, but we had no way to care for them. We weren't even certain if what we carried could help them without medical supervision. Near sunrise, we finally reached a deserted street lined with old storefronts. The clinic was supposed to be on the corner of Maple and 3rd, according to the newcomer's directions. I slowed to a crawl, scanning the buildings for any sign of life. Thick metal shutters covered most windows. Some doors had large, red X marks painted across them. Then we saw it. A squat brick building with a flickering sign that read, "Community Health Center." The door was slightly ajar, and faint light glowed from inside. I parked across the street, turned off the engine, and took a deep breath. We all got out, carefully helping Dr. Morrow. With each step, my heart hammered, worried that the clinic would be overrun or abandoned. But as we approached, we spotted movement inside. Someone rushed past a window, carrying what looked like medical supplies. "Hello?" I called out, pushing the door open. Inside, the waiting area had been transformed into a makeshift emergency station. Chairs had been pushed aside, and stretchers lined the walls. Several volunteers and medical workers moved about, tending to people who lay on blankets, some of them coughing or trembling. One volunteer noticed us and motioned for a doctor to come over. A weary-looking physician stepped forward, wearing a stained lab coat. Their face was lined with exhaustion, but they greeted us with a sense of relief. "You're not injured, are you?" they asked, eyeing Dr. Morrow. "Come in. Set him down over here." We placed Dr. Morrow on a vacant cot. My passenger wavered on his feet, nearly collapsing until I caught him by the arm. The doctor beckoned us closer. "We have limited supplies," they said grimly, "but we'll do what we can." My passenger and I exchanged a look. He lifted the case of vials, opening it just enough for the doctor to see. "We brought something," he said, voice trembling with a combination of exhaustion and hope. "An experimental antidote. We think it might help." The doctor's eyes widened. "Where did you get—" "It's a long story," I interjected gently. "But it might be real. We need your help to figure out how to use it safely." In that moment, the clinic bustled around us with renewed energy. The doctor called over another medical professional, and together they examined the vials, flipping through the research notes we'd salvaged. A glimmer of hope touched their expressions, but it was tempered by the enormity of the challenge. They didn't have the proper equipment, nor an ideal environment for controlled testing. Yet, in a crumbling city on the brink of total lockdown, this might be the only chance they had. My passenger was guided to a makeshift triage station, where a nurse checked his vitals. Dr. Morrow remained unconscious, but the staff said they'd do what they could to stabilize him. The newcomer, who had led us here, sank into a chair, relief etched on their face. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe we'd turned a corner, that maybe we'd found a place where solutions could be forged. Then reality set in. The doors of the clinic rattled as more and more people came seeking help. Supplies were dangerously low. The doctor pulled me aside, voice taut with worry. "We can try to administer what you brought," they said. "But there are so many infected individuals, and no guarantee this works on everyone." I nodded, feeling the weight of the crisis pressing down on me. Even if the experimental antidote helped a few, what about the rest? How would we mass produce it, especially in a city under siege by a disease spreading faster than we could contain? "Do what you can," I managed to say. "We'll figure out the rest, somehow." And so here I am, telling this story from a cramped corner of the community health center's waiting area. Outside, the world feels like it's unraveling at the seams, yet a thread of hope remains within these walls. My passenger is resting, showing signs of improvement, thanks to the injection we administered. Dr. Morrow is still in a delicate state, but the medical staff haven't given up on him. They're studying his notes, preparing to test the antidote on volunteer patients who have nowhere else to turn. I don't know how this will end. Maybe the antidote works, and we'll see the dawn of a recovery that puts the city back on track. Maybe it fails, or mutates, or proves too limited to help everyone in time. All I know is that I've gone from a quiet life of driving a cab, shuttling people from point A to point B, to finding myself at the center of a whirlwind that could determine the fate of countless lives. The clinic's lights flicker as the generator sputters. I can hear new arrivals downstairs, some coughing, others pleading for assistance. No one is sure when relief might come, or if it ever will. The tension is palpable, but so is the fragile optimism. People are banding together, trading information and resources, clinging to the idea that even in the darkest times, we can find a spark of hope. For now, I wait. I keep my cab's keys in my pocket, ready to drive anyone, anywhere, if there's a chance it might help. We have the vials, the notebook, and a shaky belief in the possibility of a solution. Beyond the barricades, the city remains in turmoil, with pockets of chaos and fear spreading like the illness itself. But here, in this small clinic on Maple and 3rd, we've carved out a sanctuary of determination and resilience. We don't know what tomorrow holds. Perhaps the lines of communication will be cut entirely and we'll be left to fend for ourselves. Or maybe, in a few hours, the doors will fly open with government officials demanding we relinquish our vials. Or perhaps reinforcements will arrive, scientists with advanced equipment ready to mass-produce the cure. It's impossible to say. The only thing I'm certain of is that we're on the cusp of something monumental, either salvation or heartbreak. And maybe, just maybe, That single injection I gave my passenger was enough proof that we haven't lost yet. If you're reading or hearing this, know that we tried. We took that leap of faith. Whether it pays off or not, well, that's a chapter still unwritten in a city where every new day brings both terror and a faint glimmer of possibility. We're doing our best to tip the scales in favor of hope. I'm a cab driver. I was never meant to be a hero. But sometimes you can't choose the role you play when the world starts coming apart. This is my story for now. And this is where it pauses, on a knife's edge between ruin and rescue. Only time will tell which way we fall. Thank you for listening. If this story sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps this channel alive. Until next time, stay vigilant and remember, curiosity can be quite the companion, and sometimes a curse.